The judge looked at the document for a long time. Courtroom 4B, Brooklyn Supreme Court, January 2025. 200 people watching. Tenants, lawyers, media. And Gerald Marchetti sitting in the front row with his expensive suit and his expensive lawyers and his absolute certainty that he would win. He'd always won before. Judge Patricia Walsh looked up from the page. Her expression had changed. Something I hadn't seen in 15 years of courtrooms. Not anger exactly. Something colder. "Mr. Marchetti," she said, "did you write this?" Marchetti leaned forward, confident. "Your Honor, I have no idea what—" November 14th, 2010. Your handwriting, confirmed by 2 independent experts. To your superintendent, Frank Kowalski. Quote, "Frank, we need these old tenants out. The rent-controlled ones. Don't fix things too fast. Let them suffer a little." The courtroom went silent. Marchetti's lawyer stood up immediately. "Objection, Your Honor. The provenance of that document—" Judge Walsh didn't even look at him. She was looking at Marchetti. And for the first time in his life, Gerald Marchetti had no answer. "Mr. Marchetti," the judge said again, "I'll ask you one more time. Did you write this?" He said nothing. And that was the moment. The moment 30 years of silence ended. The moment a dead man's notebooks changed everything. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning. My name is Maya Patel. I'm a tenant rights attorney in Brooklyn. I've been fighting landlords for 15 years, bad ones, corrupt ones, the kind who treat human beings like revenue streams. I've won cases, lost some, seen the system work, seen it fail. But nothing prepared me for Frank Kowalski's basement. I live at 847 Prospect Avenue, have for 6 years. A rent-stabilized 1-bedroom on the 2nd floor, $1,400 a month. In Brooklyn, that's practically free. The building is old, 1923. 6 stories, brick facade, fire escape zigzagging down the front. 47 units, most occupied by long-term tenants, some for decades. The kind of building where neighbors know each other's names, where kids grow up and come back to visit. Frank Kowalski was the superintendent, had been for 30 years. Since before I moved in, since before most of the current tenants moved in. Everyone knew Frank. You couldn't not know Frank. He was there at 6 a.m. fixing the boiler. There at midnight when the pipes burst in 4C. There on Christmas morning when Mrs. Adler's heat went out and the temperature was 12 degrees. Frank was the building. Without him, 847 Prospect would have fallen apart years ago. He was 68 when he died. Heart attack. Found in his basement office on a Tuesday morning by Mrs. Chen from 3A, who went down to report a leak in her bathroom. Mrs. Chen found Frank slumped over his desk, a pen in his hand, a notebook open in front of him, like he'd been writing when it happened. The coroner said he'd been dead for approximately 8 hours, alone in the basement, in the dark, writing. I went to the funeral, small service, Catholic church on Atlantic Avenue, maybe 40 people, tenants from the building, a few friends, no family. Frank had none that anyone knew of. His wife had died 12 years ago, no children. After the service, I spoke to building management, Gerald Marchetti's property management company, Marchetti Properties LLC. Someone needs to clean out Frank's office in the basement. I said to the property manager, a woman named Diane, his personal belongings. Diane looked uncomfortable. Actually, we were going to have maintenance handle that, just box everything up and donate it. I'll do it, I said. Frank was my neighbor. I'd like to go through his things, make sure nothing personal gets thrown away. Diane hesitated. Then sure, I'll get you the key. That was 3 weeks ago. I went down to the basement on a Saturday morning, just planned to spend an hour or two, box up his clothes, his photos, whatever personal items he had. I ended up spending the entire day. Frank's basement office was small, maybe 10 by 12 feet, a folding table as a desk, a metal chair, a bare light bulb hanging from the ceiling. A cot in the corner. He sometimes slept there during emergencies, nights when the boiler broke at 3 a.m. and he couldn't fix it and go home and come back. The walls were lined with metal shelving, tools on one side, wrenches, screwdrivers, pipe fittings, everything a superintendent needs, organized perfectly. Frank was meticulous. On the other side, files, cardboard boxes, dozens of them, labeled by year, 1994, 1995, 1996, all the way to 2024. 30 years of files. I assumed they were maintenance records, work orders, parts receipts, normal superintendent stuff. I opened the first box, 1994, inside notebooks. Small black notebooks, the kind you buy at any drugstore, lined paper, Frank's handwriting, neat, careful, slightly old-fashioned. I opened the first notebook, January 1994, and I stopped breathing. Because what I was reading wasn't just maintenance records. It was a 30-year chronicle of a landlord's war against his own tenants. If stories about the invisible workers who held communities together and the systems that tried to destroy them matter to you, subscribe to this channel. We tell stories about the people who showed up when no one else would, and the evidence they left behind. Now let me tell you about Frank Kowalski, and about what Gerald Marchetti didn't want anyone to find. I need to give you some context first, about the building, about rent stabilization, about why any of this matters. 847 Prospect Avenue is what's called a rent-stabilized building in New York City. Nearly 1 million apartments in the city fall under rent stabilization laws. It means landlords can only raise rent by a certain percentage each year, usually around 2 to 3%, and they can only evict tenants for specific legal reasons, just cause the law calls it. For tenants, it's protection. A guarantee that you won't be priced out of your home, that your landlord can't double your rent overnight, that you have a right to stay where you live as long as you follow the rules. For landlords like Gerald Marchetti, it's a cage. I know this because I've spent 15 years fighting people like him. Tenant rights is my specialty. I've sued landlords across Brooklyn, Queens, the Bronx. Some of them are sloppy, some of them are lazy. Marchetti is neither. Marchetti is strategic. Gerald Marchetti bought 847 Prospect Avenue in 1990. He was 32. Already had money, family money, real estate money. He'd been buying buildings across Brooklyn for years. But rent-stabilized buildings were different, harder to profit from. The rents were low, the tenants were protected. You couldn't just flip the building or jack up the prices, unless you got the tenants out first. If a rent-stabilized tenant moves out voluntarily, the landlord can reset the rent to market rate for the next tenant. In Brooklyn, that can mean going from $1,400 a month to $3,500 or more. So the incentive is clear: get long-term tenants out. Replace them with new tenants paying full price. Eventually, the whole building is paying market rate. The legal way to do this is slow, patient, painful. Offer buyouts. Wait for tenants to die or move naturally. Renovate units between tenancies. Marchetti didn't want to be patient. I didn't know this yet. Not in 1994. Not when Frank started writing his notebooks. I wasn't even born yet. I'm 38 now. I moved into 847 Prospect 6 years ago, drawn by the low rent and the quiet street and the fact that it felt like a real neighborhood. Not the gentrified, sanitized version of Brooklyn that was swallowing everything else. What I know now, what Frank's notebooks taught me, is that the building I moved into was a battlefield, had been since 1990, and Frank Kowalski had been fighting in it alone for 30 years. The first notebook entry, January 3rd, 1994. New year, new superintendent job. Started at 847 Prospect today. Mr. Marchetti hired me, $28,000 a year. Apartment and basement included. Not much, but it's mine. Building needs work. Lots of work. Boiler is old. Plumbing on the 5th floor is terrible. Roof has been leaking for years. I'll make a list. Get it fixed. Frank was optimistic. Fresh start. New job. A building full of people who needed him. Asterisk, January 10th, 1994, submitted first repair list to Mr. Marchetti. 47 items. Boiler needs replacement, $12,000. 5th floor plumbing, $8,500. Roof patching, $4,200. Hallway lighting on 3 floors. Elevator inspection overdue. Lobby door lock, fire escape on east side rusted through. Mr. Marchetti looked at the list, said, "Frank, this is way too much. We can't spend this kind of money. Just handle the emergencies. The rest can wait." Frank didn't think much of it at first. Every landlord cuts corners. Every superintendent learns to work with limited budgets. But then the pattern started. February 18th, 1994, Mrs. Kowalczyk in 5B. Her radiator stopped working. 2nd floor too. I told Mr. Marchetti. He said, "How long can they wait?" I said, "It's February. It's cold." He said, "A few days won't kill anyone. I'll approve it next week." February 25th, 1994. Mrs. Kowalczyk called again. 7 days without heat. Her apartment is 52 degrees. She's 74 years old, lives alone. I went up to check on her. She was wearing 3 sweaters and a coat in her own home. I fixed the radiator myself, bought the part, $340, out of my own pocket. I couldn't wait for Mr. Marchetti's approval. She could have gotten sick. That was the first time, $340 out of Frank's pocket to fix something the landlord refused to fix. It wouldn't be the last. March 2nd, 1994. Mr. Marchetti called me to his office today, asked about Mrs. Kowalczyk's radiator. I told him I fixed it. He wasn't happy. Frank, he said, I told you to wait. When I say wait, you wait. Don't go spending money on repairs without my say-so. I said, she's 74 and it was February. He said, that's not my problem. Next time, you wait. Frank wrote the next entry very carefully, each word deliberate. I have a bad feeling about this landlord. Something isn't right. He doesn't want to fix the building, and he doesn't care why. Over the next 2 years, the pattern became clear. Frank documented everything. Repair requests submitted. Landlord's response. Delay, denial, eventual action, or no action at all. By the end of 1995, Frank had submitted 124 repair requests. Marchetti had approved 31, denied or ignored the rest. The building was deteriorating, slowly, systematically, and the tenants, mostly elderly, mostly long-term, mostly on fixed incomes, were starting to suffer. June 14, 1996, water leak in 4A coming from the roof. Mrs. Patterson's ceiling is collapsing. I showed Mr. Marchetti the damage. He looked at it for 30 seconds. Said, insurance might cover this. Let me think about it. He's been thinking about it for 3 months. The leak is getting worse. Mrs. Patterson is 71. She's been putting buckets under the dripping spots for weeks. Her bedroom is full of buckets. I can't watch this. I bought tarps and plastic sheeting, covered what I could. It's not enough. The roof needs to be fixed. $4,200. I don't have $4,200, but I have $800 saved. I'll spend what I can and keep working on it. I read that entry sitting on Frank's basement floor, surrounded by 30 years of notebooks, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time as a lawyer. Rage, not the professional kind. Not the courtroom kind where you channel your anger into arguments and motions and legal strategies. This was personal, raw, the kind of anger that sits in your chest and burns. Because I knew what Marchetti was doing. I'd seen it before in other buildings with other landlords. The strategy was textbook. Don't fix things. Let the building deteriorate. Make long-term tenants uncomfortable enough that they leave voluntarily. No eviction needed. No legal battle. They just give up, move out. And the landlord resets the rent. It's called constructive eviction. It's technically illegal in New York, but proving it is almost impossible. Because how do you prove a landlord deliberately didn't fix something? Landlords always have excuses. Budget constraints, contractor delays, insurance issues. Unless you have 30 years of notebooks documenting every single failure. I kept reading. The notebooks got darker as the years went on. Frank's handwriting stayed neat, but the entries grew longer, more detailed, more desperate. September 3rd, 1997. Mr. Adler, in 2B, complained about mold in his bathroom. Black mold. Growing on the walls and ceiling. I went to look. It's bad. Really bad. Caused by a water leak that's been there for 2 years. The one in 4A that was never properly fixed. Told Mr. Marchetti. He said, mold isn't an emergency. Put some bleach on it. I told him black mold is dangerous, especially for older people. He said, Mr. Adler is fine. He's been living with it for months. October 15th, 1997. Mr. Adler in the hospital. Respiratory infection. Doctor says it's likely mold-related. His daughter called me, crying, asked why the building has mold. I couldn't tell her the truth. That the landlord knows, that he chose not to fix it. I can't say that. If I talk, Marchetti fires me. And then who takes care of these people? That was the trap. Frank understood it perfectly. If he spoke up, he'd lose his job. And if he lost his job, the tenants would lose the only person actually taking care of them. So he stayed silent. And he paid out of his own pocket, out of his own time, out of his own life. December 1998. Spent $2,200 this year on repairs Mr. Marchetti refused to make. My savings are almost gone. But I can't stop. If I stop, People get hurt. By 1999, Frank had spent over $5,000 of his own money. By 2003, it was $15,000. By 2010, it was over $40,000. A superintendent making $28,000 a year later raised to $32,000, spending his own salary fixing a building that his landlord refused to maintain. I found the receipts. Frank kept every single one. Hardware store receipts, plumber invoices he paid himself, heating oil deliveries he authorized when Marchetti cut off the building's account in winter. Every dollar documented, every expense dated, every repair tied to a specific unit and a specific tenant. Frank wasn't just fixing things, he was building a case. I don't know if he knew that's what he was doing. Maybe he just kept records because he was careful, because he was organized, because 30 years of maintenance work teaches you to document everything. But the result was the same. 30 years of evidence, undeniable, irrefutable, a complete record of a landlord's deliberate campaign to destroy his own building and drive out his tenants. I turned to the notebooks from 2005, mid-career for Frank. The building was in bad shape by then, but the tenants were still there, stubborn, loyal, refusing to leave. And Marchetti was getting impatient. March 7th, 2005. Mr. Marchetti came to the building today, unannounced, walked through every floor, looked at the tenants, counted doors, made notes on a clipboard. Afterward, he pulled me aside, asked me how many of the original tenants were still here. I said about 30. He nodded, said, "That's a lot of money on the table, Frank. A lot of money." I didn't like the way he said it. April 2005. Marchetti hired a company to inspect the building. Not a normal inspection. They went unit by unit, photographed everything, asked tenants questions about their apartments, how long they'd been there, whether they had any complaints. Mrs. Rodriguez in 3C asked me what it was about. I said I didn't know. She looked worried. She's been here 22 years. Her grandchildren grew up in this building. I have a bad feeling. The bad feeling was justified. June 2005, Marchetti sent letters to 12 tenants today. Buyout, offers, each one different. Mrs. Kowalczyk got $15,000. Mr. Patterson got $22,000. Mrs. Rodriguez got $18,000. These are insults. Their apartments are worth $200, 000 plus at market rate. He's offering them a fraction. Most of them won't take it. They've lived here for decades. This is their home. But some of them, the ones who are really struggling, the ones whose apartments are falling apart, the ones who are tired of fighting, those are the ones Marchetti is counting on. 3 tenants took the buyouts. Frank documented each one. July 14th, 2005, Mr. Hoffman, 4D, took buyout, $19,000. Moved to assisted living in New Jersey. His apartment was 68 degrees in winter for 3 years. He was tired. July 28th, 2005, Mrs. Petrov, 5A, took buyout, $16,000. Moved in with daughter in Connecticut. Ceiling had been leaking for 2 years. Mold in the bathroom. She was sick all the time. August 3rd, 2005, Mr. Torres, 6B, took buyout, $21,000. Plumbing had been broken for 6 months. No hot water. He's 76. He gave up. Frank wrote one more line after the Torres entry. 3 more gone. Marchetti wins again. I'm running out of ways to keep this building alive. I sat in that basement for hours reading. The light was bad, just a single bulb overhead. My back hurt from sitting on the concrete floor. I should have stopped, should have taken a break, gone upstairs, eaten something. But I couldn't stop reading, because every page was another piece of evidence. Another nail in Marchetti's coffin. Another 30 years of a man documenting his own landlord's crimes while spending his life savings to protect the people Marchetti was trying to destroy. I found the entry I'd been looking for, the one that would change everything. November 14th, 2010. Marchetti came to the basement today. Just the 2 of us. He sat down across from me, casual, like we were going to talk about the weather. He said, "Frank, we need these old tenants out, the rent-controlled ones. Don't fix things too fast. Let them suffer a little. They'll leave on their own eventually. That's how it works." He said it like it was normal, like it was just business. Like these people, Mrs. Rodriguez, Mrs. Chen, Mr. Adler, were numbers on a spreadsheet, not human beings who have lived in this building for decades. I looked at him. I wanted to say something, fight back, tell him this was wrong, but I knew what would happen. He'd fire me, and then nobody would be here to help these people. So I said nothing. I just nodded. But I wrote it down, every word. Exactly what he said. Date, time, his exact words. Someday, someone needs to know what this man is. I'm keeping everything. Every repair request, every denial, every dollar I've spent, every tenant who left because of what he did. Someday this matters. Someday had come. I closed the notebook, put it down on the concrete floor, and I sat there, in Frank's basement, in the building he'd protected for 30 years, in the dark, under that single bare light bulb. And I cried. Not for Frank. Not yet. I cried for the tenants, for the 30 years of suffering Marchetti had inflicted, for the people who left because their homes were falling apart, for the ones who got sick, for the ones who gave up. And I cried for Frank because he'd been fighting this battle alone for 30 years, with no one to help him, no one who knew, no one who believed him, until now. I'm a tenant rights attorney. I've spent my career fighting landlords. I know the law. I know how to build a case. I know what evidence looks like. What Frank had built in this basement was the most complete, most devastating case I'd ever seen. 30 years of maintenance logs, repair requests and denials, dollar amounts, tenant testimonials, written down in Frank's careful handwriting after conversations with residents who trusted him, photographs of damage, Marchetti's own written instructions to neglect the building, all of it, documented, dated, organized, a dead man's testimony, 30 years in the making. And it was going to destroy Gerald Marchetti. If you're listening to this and you live in a rent-stabilized apartment or any apartment with a superintendent, think about what that person does for you, what they sacrifice, what they see that no one else sees. Frank Kowalski spent $67,000 of his own money fixing a building his landlord refused to maintain. He did it quietly, secretly, for 30 years, because he couldn't let these people suffer, even when the system told him it wasn't his job, even when his landlord told him to let them. That's not just a superintendent. That's a guardian, a protector, a man who chose people over profit every single day for 30 years. And when he died, he left behind the evidence that would finally hold his landlord accountable. The question is, what did I do with it? That's the next part of this story. Subscribe to The Quiet Reckoning if you want to hear how 30 years of notebooks brought down a corrupt landlord and changed tenant rights in New York City forever. I went back to the basement the next day, and the day after that, and the day after that, every morning before work, every evening after, weekends entirely. For 2 weeks, I lived in Frank's basement, reading, organizing, building, because what Frank had left behind wasn't just notebooks. It was a war archive, 30 years of a quiet man documenting the slow destruction of everything he loved. And the more I read, the worse it got. I started organizing chronologically, pulled every box off the shelf, laid them out across the basement floor, 1994 to 2024. 30 years of cardboard boxes lined up like gravestones. Each box contained 3 to 4 notebooks, plus receipts, plus photos, plus loose papers, letters, notes, sometimes napkins where Frank had written down things he'd overheard. I created a spreadsheet on my laptop, columns for date, unit number, repair type, cost, Marchetti's response, Frank's action, and tenant affected. By the end of the first week, I had 847 repair requests documented, 623 denied or ignored by Marchetti, 847 requests, 30 years, average of 28 per year, more than 2 per month, every single one documented with Frank's careful handwriting, every denial noted, every consequence tracked. And for 623 of those requests, Frank had written the same thing in different ways. Denied, I'll handle it myself. Marchetti said no, fixing it anyway. Not approved, bought the part, paid cash, told him it's an emergency. He said not my problem, I disagree. 623 times. Frank had gone behind his landlord's back and fixed things himself. With his own money, his own time, his own hands. The receipts told the full story. I found a box labeled expenses personal inside a ledger, handwritten, every dollar Frank had spent on the building out of his own pocket. Organized by year. 1994, $2,847. 1995, $3,412. 1996, $1,890. 1997, $4,230. 1998, $2,210. 1999, $3,880. $2,950. The numbers went up and down, some years more, some years less, depending on what broke, depending on what Marchetti refused to fix. I added them up as I went. By 2005, $31,847 cumulative. By 2010, $48,920. By 2015, $58,340. By 2020, $64,110. By 2024, $67,483. $67,483 on a salary of $28,000 a year, later raised to $32,000. Frank had spent more than 2 years of his entire salary fixing a building his landlord refused to maintain. I sat with that number for a long time, $67,483, written in Frank's handwriting at the bottom of the ledger, underlined twice, like he knew exactly what he'd given up and chose to do it anyway. I found more of Marchetti's written instructions, not just the November 2010 letter. Frank had kept everything. A memo from 2003, typed on Marchetti Properties letterhead. Re-847 Prospect Avenue Maintenance Protocol. Effective immediately, all repair requests exceeding $500 must be approved directly by Gerald Marchetti before work begins. No exceptions. Routine maintenance under $500 may proceed at superintendent's discretion, but superintendent assumes personal financial responsibility for all materials and labor. This policy is in effect until further notice. Read that again. Superintendent assumes personal financial responsibility. Marchetti had put it in writing, made Frank pay for repairs out of his own pocket, and documented it as official policy. That memo alone was worth a lawsuit. But Frank had dozens more. July 2007, email from Marchetti to Frank. Frank, stop replacing the hallway lights on the 3rd floor. Tenants have been complaining for 6 months. Let them complain. The lights work fine in the daytime. Nighttime is not an emergency. GMLO, February 2009. Note from Marchetti, hand-delivered. Frank, the boiler in the north wing is not to be serviced until April. Budget constraints. If tenants call to complain about heat, tell them it's a scheduled maintenance window. Do not tell them the truth. GM, tell them it's a scheduled maintenance window. Don't tell them the truth. Marchetti had instructed his superintendent to lie to tenants. In writing, I photographed every document, scanned everything, backed it up 3 times, because this evidence was irreplaceable. 30 years of a dead man's testimony. If anything happened to these notebooks, it was gone forever. The tenant files were the hardest to read. Frank had kept a separate notebook for each long-term tenant, not maintenance records, personal files, notes about their lives, their health, their families, their struggles. I found the file for Mrs. Eleanor Adler, apartment 2C, Frank's neighbor. Eleanor Adler, age 68, when I started, widow, lives alone, has a daughter in Connecticut who visits monthly, loves crossword puzzles, makes the best apple cake on the block, brings me a slice every Christmas. Her apartment has had a water leak since 1996. I fixed what I could, but the source is in the roof. Needs real repair. Marchetti won't approve it. 2001, mold growing behind her bedroom wall. I found it when she complained about a smell. Black mold. Bad, told Marchetti. He said, bleach it. I bleached it. It came back. 2003, Eleanor hospitalized. Respiratory infection. Doctor says mold related. Daughter furious. Asks why the building has mold. I can't tell her the truth. 2005, Eleanor's breathing is worse. Uses an inhaler now, hasn't before. Doctor says chronic exposure. 2008, Eleanor moves to assisted living. Takes buyout offer of $17,000. Says she can't breathe in the apartment anymore. Marchetti gets her unit. Resets rent to $2,800. New tenant moves in within a week. Eleanor died in 2011. Her daughter sent me a card. Thank you for taking care of Mom. I kept the card. I failed her. I couldn't fix the roof, couldn't stop the mold, couldn't save her home. I should have done more. I should have fought harder. I'm sorry, Eleanor. I found the card. Tucked inside the notebook, a simple thank you card from Eleanor's daughter. Thank you for taking care of Mom. She always said you were the best neighbor she ever had. Frank had kept it for 13 years, next to his confession that he'd failed her. I found more files like this. Dozens of them. Mr. Walter Patterson. Apartment 4A71 when Frank started. Roof leak above his unit for 6 years. Ceiling collapsed in 2002. Marchetti approved a temporary patch. Frank did the real repair himself, $3,800 out of pocket. Patterson took a buyout in 2006, $22,000. Moved to his son's house in Pennsylvania, died 2 years later. Mrs. Carmen Rodriguez, apartment 3C, 22 years in the building when Frank started. 3 generations grew up in her unit. Her grandchildren played in the hallways. Heating cut off in winter, 2004. Marchetti refused to pay the oil company. Frank used his own credit card, $1,200. Rodriguez stayed, but she was frightened, knew something was wrong. Rodriguez finally left in 2012. Not a buyout, just left. Moved to her daughter's place in the Bronx. Told Frank, "I can't fight anymore, Frank. I'm too old and too tired." Frank wrote, "Carmen left today, 28 years in this building. Gone because I couldn't protect her enough." Another one Marchetti pushed out. "I counted the departures. Between 1994 and 2024, 31 tenants left 847 Prospect Avenue. Frank had documented every single one. Of those 31, Frank believed and documented evidence for 23 who left because of conditions Marchetti deliberately refused to fix. 23 families pushed out of their homes by a landlord who refused to maintain the building they paid rent to live in. And Frank had watched every single one leave. Helpless, alone, writing it all down. I found something else in the 2010 box. A folder labeled "The Letter." Inside, a copy of the November 14, 2010 memo. The one where Marchetti told Frank to let them suffer a little, but also a second page, Frank's own response, never sent to Marchetti, written that same night. "Mr. Marchetti, you told me today to let the tenants suffer, to not fix things, to drive them out. I have worked in this building for 16 years. I have watched you ignore 500 repair requests. I have watched you deny heating in winter. I have watched you let mold grow in people's homes. I have watched you good people leave because you made their lives unbearable. I have spent $41,000 of my own money fixing what you refused to fix, because I couldn't let these people suffer. You are a cruel man, Mr. Marchetti. You treat human beings like obstacles between you and money. I am not going to send this letter, because if I do, you will fire me, and then no one will be here to help these people. But I am keeping everything, every record, every receipt, every word you have ever said or written to me, every repair you refused, every tenant who left because of what you did. And someday, I don't know when, someone will find this, and they will know the truth about you." Frank Kowalski, November 14th, 2010. Frank had written this letter 30 years into his fight, 16 years into documenting Marchetti's crimes, and he'd never sent it, just filed it away with everything else. Because he knew his job wasn't to confront Marchetti, his job was to protect the tenants. And the only way he could do that was by staying, by being present, by fixing what he could. Even if it meant watching the fight from the inside, alone. I closed the folder, sat in the basement, thought about what I just read. Then I opened my laptop and started building the lawsuit. I work alone, small practice. Just me and a paralegal named James who comes in 3 days a week. I specialize in tenant rights, housing discrimination, and landlord accountability. I filed suits against 23 landlords in my career. Won 19, lost 4, settled the rest. None of them were like this. Most landlord cases are circumstantial. Tenants complain about conditions. Landlords deny responsibility. You argue about timelines, about who knew what, about whether the damage was pre-existing or caused by neglect. It's messy, ambiguous, hard to prove. Frank's notebooks removed all ambiguity. 847 repair requests, everyone documented with date, description, and Marchetti's specific response, photographs of damage before and after, receipts proving the landlord never paid, Marchetti's own written instructions to neglect the building, and the November 2010 memo in Marchetti's own handwriting, telling his superintendent to deliberately make tenants uncomfortable so they'd leave. That memo was the smoking gun. Everything else was supporting evidence, but that one document, "Let them suffer a little," was a sentence that would end Gerald Marchetti. I started making calls. First, the tenants still in the building, 14 remained as of Frank's death. Long-term residents who'd refused to leave despite everything. I knocked on doors, introduced myself. Most of them already knew me as the quiet lawyer on the second floor, explained what I'd found. what Frank had documented. The reactions were mixed. Mrs. Chen, apartment 3, A, 79 years old, in the building for 31 years. The woman who found Frank's body, she listened to everything I told her. Then she nodded slowly. I always knew, she said. Not the details, but I knew he was doing it on purpose. The heating, the repairs, the way he ignored us. Nobody treats people like that by accident. Why didn't you report it? To who? She looked at me with tired eyes. I called the city once, in 2008. They sent an inspector. He spent 20 minutes in the building, said everything was within acceptable range. Marchetti had his lawyers there the whole time. Would you be willing to testify? In court? Mrs. Chen thought about it. Long time. Then Frank spent 30 years protecting us. The least I can do is tell the truth about what happened. Not everyone was so willing. Mr. Davis, apartment 6A67, in the building for 12 years. Newer than most. I don't want trouble, he said when I explained. I like it here. It's cheap. If I testify against the landlord, what happens to my apartment? Rent stabilization protects you. He can't retaliate. Can't he? You think I don't know what happens to people who cause problems? I've seen it. People who complain. Suddenly there's code violations. Suddenly inspectors show up. Suddenly it's your fault. He closed the door, politely, but firmly. I understood. Fear is real. Retaliation is real. Even when the law says it can't happen, tenants know better. I spoke to 11 of the 14 remaining tenants. 7 agreed to testify. 4 declined. 2 said they needed time to think. 7 witnesses, plus Frank's notebooks, plus 30 years of documentation. It was enough. More than enough. But I needed one more thing. I needed to find the tenants who had already left. The ones Frank had documented leaving. The ones who might still be alive. I spent 2 weeks tracking them down, using Frank's files, public records, phone calls, social media, the kind of detective work that tenant rights lawyers learn to do when the system fails. Of the 31 tenants who'd left between 1994 and 2024, I found 19 still living, scattered across New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Pennsylvania. I called each one. Some didn't remember me, didn't know who lived at 847 Prospect now, didn't care about the past. But some, most of them actually, remembered everything. Mrs. Patricia Hoffman, now 78, living in assisted living in New Jersey. She left in 2005 after taking Marchetti's buyout. I remember every single day in that building, she told me over the phone. Her voice shaky but clear. I lived there for 19 years. It was my home. And that man, Marchetti, he made it impossible to stay. Would you be willing to give a statement or testify? Long pause. Then, honey, I've been waiting 19 years for someone to ask me that. Carmen Rodriguez, now 74, living with her daughter in the Bronx, left in 2012 after 28 years. Frank used to bring me soup when I was sick, she said. In winter when the heat was off, he'd come up with blankets. He was a good man, the best man. She cried when I told her Frank had died, cried harder when I told her what he'd left behind. He kept records? All those years? Everything. Mrs. Rodriguez, 30 years. Every repair request, every denial, everything Marchetti did, and everything Frank did to protect you. Silence on the line. Then tell me where to sign. 15 former tenants agreed to give statements. 7 current tenants agreed to testify. Plus Frank's notebooks, plus Marchetti's own written instructions. I had everything I needed. I filed the lawsuit on December 15th, 2024, 3 weeks after Frank died. Maya Patel, as attorney for the tenants of 847 Prospect Avenue, et al. v. Gerald Marchetti and Marchetti Properties, LLC. The complaint was 247 pages long. I'd never written anything that long in my life, but every page was necessary. Every piece of evidence had to be included. Every tenant's story had to be told. The core claims constructive eviction. Marchetti had deliberately neglected the building to force out rent-stabilized tenants, documented over 30 years. Fraud. Marchetti had instructed his superintendent to lie to tenants about maintenance issues, had created a false policy forcing the superintendent to pay for repairs personally. Violation of New York Housing Maintenance Code. 623 repair requests denied or ignored, documented with photographs and dates. Conspiracy. Marchetti had a written strategy, documented in his own words, to drive out long-term tenants and reset rents to market rate. The damages sought $12.4 million. Compensation for 23 tenants who were forced out, restoration of rent-stabilized status for all affected units, full building renovation at Marchetti's expense, and one more thing, something that went beyond money, beyond the lawsuit. I wanted a law named after Frank. Marchetti's lawyers responded within 48 hours. A 40-page motion to dismiss. The usual arguments: insufficient evidence, statute of limitations, hearsay. The notebooks were inadmissible, written by a dead man, unverified, potentially fabricated. I expected this. Frank had anticipated it too. Because in the back of the 2024 box, the last box, the most recent notebooks, I found something that made me smile for the first time since finding Frank's basement. A notarized statement, dated March 2004 on 8 months before Frank died. Frank had gone to a notary, had the statement witnessed and signed. It read, "I, Frank Kowalski, being of sound mind and body, hereby declare that all notebooks, records, receipts, photographs, and documents contained in my basement office at 847 Prospect Avenue are authentic records created and maintained by me over the course of my 30 years as superintendent of said building. All entries are accurate to the best of my knowledge and were recorded contemporaneously with the events described. All expenses documented in my personal ledger were paid by me out of my own funds for repairs and maintenance that were denied or ignored by the building owner, Gerald Marchetti. All written communications attributed to Gerald Marchetti in these records are authentic documents received by me from said individual. I maintain these records for the purpose of establishing the truth about the conditions at 847 Prospect Avenue and the actions of its owner. Signed, Frank Kowalski. Notarized March 14th, 2024. State of New York. Frank had known. He'd known that someday someone would challenge the authenticity of his records, and he planned for it. 8 months before his death, he'd had his testimony legally authenticated. Frank Kowalski had been a superintendent, not a lawyer, not an activist, not a public figure. But he'd understood something that most people never learn, that truth needs to be documented, protected, made official, because the people with power will always deny it. And Frank had done everything in his power to make sure the truth survived him. I called James, my paralegal, the next morning, told him about the notarized statement. "Maya," he said, "this case is bulletproof. I know. Marchetti's lawyers can't dismiss this. Not with a notarized declaration, not with 30 years of contemporaneous records. I know. This goes to trial. I know." And it did. January 2025, Courtroom 4, B. Brooklyn Supreme Court. The moment I told you about at the beginning, Judge Patricia Walsh, Gerald Marchetti in his expensive suit, his expensive lawyers, his absolute certainty, that certainty was about to end. But before I tell you what happened in that courtroom, before I tell you how 30 years of notebooks changed everything, I need to tell you about one more thing I found in Frank's basement. The last notebook, 2024, the one that was open on his desk when he died, the one Mrs. Chen found next to his body. I almost missed it. It was separate from the boxes, not labeled, just a small black notebook on his desk, pen still uncapped beside it. I opened it to the last entry, the last thing Frank ever wrote, the morning he died. October 8th, 2024, woke up early. Heart has been bothering me again. Doctor says I need to slow down, rest more. But I can't stop. If I stop, the building falls apart and the people in it. Mrs. Chen's bathroom leak needs fixing today. I'll get to it after breakfast. I've been thinking about the notebooks, about everything I've kept. 30 years, 847 repair requests, $67,000, 23 tenants pushed out. I'm not going to live forever. My heart is getting worse. I need to make sure someone finds this, someone who can do something with it. I left a note for whoever cleans out my office, told them where everything is, told them to find a tenant rights lawyer. I hope they do. I hope someone reads all of this. I hope someone fights for this building, for these people. I've done what I can. For 30 years, I've done what I can. It wasn't enough. It was never going to be enough. Not alone. But maybe it's a start. Frank Kowalski. October 8th, 2024. I looked for the note he mentioned, the one he'd left for whoever cleaned out his office. Found it taped to the inside of the basement door. A single sheet of paper. Frank's handwriting. If you are reading this, I am gone. Please do not throw away the boxes on the shelves. They are important. They contain 30 years of records about this building, about what the landlord has done, about what I have done to try to fix it. Please find a tenant rights lawyer, give them everything in this basement. The tenants of this building deserve justice. I couldn't give it to them while I was alive. Maybe someone can after I'm gone? Thank you. Frank Kowalski, Superintendent, 807 Prospect Avenue, 1994 to 2024 inches. That note was addressed to me, to whoever would come after Frank, to whoever would care enough to look. And I did. I found it, I read it, and I'm gonna do what Frank asked. I'm going to fight for this building, for these people, for 30 years of silence that deserves to be heard. If you're still listening, if this story is making you angry, good, be angry. Because this isn't just about 847 Prospect Avenue. This isn't just about Gerald Marchetti. This is about every rent-stabilized building in New York City, every landlord who deliberately neglects their tenants, every superintendent who sees the abuse and can't report it without losing their job. This is about a system that lets landlords treat human beings like inconveniences, like obstacles between them and profit. Frank Kowalski spent 30 years fighting that system, alone, in silence, with his own hands and his own money. He couldn't change the system, but he documented it every single day for 30 years. And now, finally, that documentation is going to matter. The trial starts in January, and Gerald Marchetti has no idea what's coming. January 14th, 2025. Trial Day 1, Courtroom 4B. I'd been in hundreds of courtrooms. This one felt different. The gallery was packed, every seat filled, standing room only in the back. Tenants from 847 Prospect, former tenants who traveled from New Jersey, Connecticut, Pennsylvania, community activists, housing advocates, press, and Gerald Marchetti, front row. Expensive suit, expensive lawyers, 3 of them, from a firm that charged $800 an hour. He looked confident, relaxed even, like this was a minor inconvenience, like he'd done this before and won. He had done this before, 6 lawsuits in 20 years, all dismissed or settled quietly. Marchetti knew how to bury tenant complaints, how to make problems go away with NDAs and sealed settlements. This time was different, because this time he was facing 30 years of evidence he didn't know existed. Judge Patricia Walsh entered. Everyone stood. She was in her late 50s. Sharp eyes, no-nonsense reputation. She'd been a housing court judge for 12 years before being elevated to Supreme Court. She knew landlord cases. She knew tenant rights, and she didn't tolerate bullshit. Be seated, she said. We're here for Patel v. Marchetti. Miss Patel, you're representing the plaintiffs? I stood. Yes, Your Honor. Maya Patel on behalf of the current and former tenants of 847 Prospect Avenue. Mr. Sterling, you're representing the defendant. Marchetti's lead attorney stood. Kenneth Sterling, gray hair, perfectly tailored suit. The kind of lawyer who makes $2 million a year defending real estate companies. Yes, Your Honor. Kenneth Sterling of Sterling, Whitman and Cross, representing Gerald Marchetti and Marchetti Properties. Judge Walsh looked at the case file, then at me. Miss Patel, this is an unusual complaint. 247 pages. Spanning 30 years. Walk me through your core claims. I'd practiced this 50 times in my apartment, in front of the mirror, to James, to my girlfriend who politely pretended to be interested. But standing there, in front of Judge Walsh, in front of Marchetti, in front of every person who'd suffered in that building, the words came naturally. Your Honor, this case is about systematic tenant abuse. Gerald Marchetti has owned 847 Prospect Avenue since 1990. It's a rent-stabilized building protected under New York law. Mr. Marchetti didn't want rent-stabilized tenants. He wanted market-rate rents, so he created a strategy. I pulled up a slide on the courtroom screen. Frank's maintenance log, 847 repair requests highlighted. Over 30 years, tenants submitted 847 legitimate repair requests. Heat failures, water leaks, mold, structural damage. Mr. Marchetti denied or ignored 623 of them, 73%. Not because of budget, not because of contractor delays, but because he wanted tenants to leave. Sterling stood. Objection, Your Honor. Counsel is speculating about my client's intent. Overruled, Judge Walsh said. This is opening statements, Mr. Sterling. Let her finish. I continued. We're not speculating. We have Mr. Marchetti's written instructions, dated November 14th, 2010, telling his superintendent, quote, let them suffer a little. We have 30 years of contemporaneous records, notarized and authenticated, kept by the building superintendent, Frank Kowalski, who died 3 months ago. I showed Frank's photo, the one from his employee badge, kind face, tired eyes. Frank Kowalski spent 30 years documenting what Mr. Marchetti did to this building, and he spent $67,483 of his own money on a salary of $32,000 a year, fixing what Mr. Marchetti refused to fix because he couldn't watch people suffer. The courtroom was silent. You could hear people breathing. 23 families were forced out of their homes because of Mr. Marchetti's deliberate neglect. We have testimony from 15 of them. We have photographs, receipts, medical records showing tenants who got sick from mold, from cold, from conditions Mr. Marchetti refused to address. I turned to look at Marchetti. He was staring at the screen, at Frank's photo. His expression hadn't changed, but his lawyers were whispering urgently. This isn't a landlord who made mistakes. This is a landlord who weaponized neglect, who turned habitability into a privilege he could withhold, who treated rent-stabilized tenants like obstacles to profit. Judge Walsh was taking notes, not looking up, just writing, fast. We're seeking full damages for every displaced tenant, full building renovation at Mr. Marchetti's expense, and a legal precedent that makes this strategy, this deliberate abuse, criminal. I sat down, hands shaking, adrenaline coursing. Sterling stood for his opening, smooth, practiced. The kind of performance you get when you charge $800 an hour. Your Honor, this case is built on emotion, not evidence. Ms. Patel wants you to believe that my client, a respected property owner with 35 years in real estate, deliberately sabotaged his own building. It's absurd. He clicked to his own presentation, financial records, budget sheets. Mr. Marchetti has spent over $400,000 on building maintenance in the last decade alone. He's replaced boilers, fixed roofs, upgraded systems. He's not a villain. He's a landlord managing a building with limited resources. As for these notebooks, Sterling gestured dismissively at the evidence table where Frank's boxes were stacked. They're the writings of a deceased employee with no way to verify their accuracy, no cross-examination, no corroboration, just the word of a man who isn't here to defend what he wrote. That made me angry, talking about Frank like he was unreliable, like 30 years of meticulous documentation was somehow suspicious. Sterling continued, the November 2010 memo that Ms. Patel referenced, allegedly in my client's handwriting, will be presenting expert testimony that it's been altered, that the context is missing, that it's being misrepresented. Judge Walsh looked up. You're claiming forgery? We're claiming context, Your Honor. Words taken out of their proper meaning. I see. Continue. The tenants who left the building did so voluntarily. Many took generous buyout offers. Others simply chose to move. That's not constructive eviction. That's normal turnover in a 30-year period. Sterling sat down, confident, like he'd just dismantled my entire case. Judge Walsh looked at both of us. We'll start with evidence presentation tomorrow. Ms. Patel, you'll go first. I want to see these notebooks. All of them. That night, I couldn't sleep. Went over every piece of evidence, every tenant testimony, every photograph, making sure everything was organized, indexed, ready. James called at midnight. Maya, you need to rest. I can't. If I miss something. You won't. You've prepared more for this case than any case I've ever seen. Frank gave you everything you need. Trust it. I wanted to trust it, but I kept thinking about Sterling's words, the writings of a deceased employee, like Frank was just some unreliable narrator, like 30 years meant nothing. Day 2. Evidence presentation. I started with the maintenance logs, projected them on the courtroom screen, page by page, Frank's careful handwriting, dates, descriptions, Marchetti's responses. January 15th, 1995, Mrs. Kowalczyk, Unit 5B, radiator failure. Outside temperature, 18 degrees, submitted to landlord, response scheduled for next week. I showed the follow-up entry. January 22nd, 1995, Mrs. Kowalczyk, still without heat, 7 days. Age 74, lives alone. Landlord has not responded. Fixed it myself. Costs $340. I showed Frank's receipt. Hardware store, January 22nd, 1995. Radiator valve, $340. Frank's signature. Judge Walsh leaned forward. This is one example. One of 623, Your Honor. I went through 20 more. Different years, different tenants, different repairs, same pattern every time. Tenant request, landlord denial or delay, Frank fixes it himself. Receipt as proof. By noon, Judge Walsh had stopped taking notes. She was just watching, listening, her expression unreadable. Sterling cross-examined. Miss Patel, how do we know these receipts are authentic? They're photocopies, not originals. The originals are in evidence, Your Honor, tagged and cataloged. Mr. Sterling received copies in discovery. And how do we know Mr. Kowalski actually made these repairs? We only have his word. I pulled up photographs. We have photos. Mr. Sterling. Frank documented the repairs. Before and after, dated, time-stamped with the cameras of the era, photos of broken radiators, then photos of the same radiators fixed, Frank's handwriting on the back of each photo, date, location, cost. Sterling tried a different angle. Even if we accept these repairs happened, that doesn't prove my client denied them. Perhaps Mr. Kowalski simply didn't wait for approval. I showed Marchetti's written policy, the 2003 memo. Superintendent assumes personal financial responsibility for all materials and labor. Your client put it in writing, Mr. Sterling. Frank didn't choose to pay. He was required to pay by policy your client created. Sterling had no response to that. Day 3, tenant testimony. Mrs. Chen went first. 79 years old, walked slowly to the stand, but her voice was steady. I asked her about the building conditions. She described them calmly, clinically, like reading a report. The heat would go out every winter. Not once. Every winter. For weeks at a time. Mr. Marchetti would say it was being fixed, but it never was. Not until Frank fixed it himself. How do you know Frank fixed it? Because I'd see him in the basement at 2 a.m. working on the boiler in January. When it was freezing, he'd be down there with his tools and his flashlight, and he'd get the heat back on every single time. Did Mr. Marchetti ever fix the boiler? Not once in the 21 years I've lived there. Frank fixed it, or it stayed broken. Sterling cross-examined, tried to rattle her. Mrs. Chen, you're friends with the plaintiff, Miss Patel, aren't you? I know her. Yes, she lives in my building. So you have a vested interest in this lawsuit succeeding. Mrs. Chen looked at him like he was a child. Young man, I'm 79 years old. I don't need money. I need the truth told. Frank spent 30 years protecting us. Now he's dead. Someone needs to tell people what he did. She didn't waver. Not once. Sterling gave up after 10 minutes. Carmen Rodriguez testified next. She cried on the stand. Couldn't help it. I lived there 28 years, raised my children there. My grandchildren visited every weekend. It was my home. And that man, she pointed at Marchetti, he made it so I couldn't stay. How did he do that, Mrs. Rodriguez? The heat, the water, the roof that leaked for 6 years. I'd call, I'd complain, nothing would happen until Frank fixed it. But Frank couldn't fix everything. He was just one person. Why did you leave? She wiped her eyes. I gave up. I was 72. I was tired. I couldn't fight anymore. So I left my home of 28 years because the landlord wanted me gone. 15 former tenants testified over 2 days. Every story the same. Years of neglect. Marchetti refusing repairs. Frank fixing what he could, eventually leaving because they couldn't take it anymore. Marchetti's lawyers objected constantly. Hearsay, speculation, lack of foundation. Judge Walsh overruled every objection. These are percipient witnesses, Mr. Sterling. They lived in this building. They're describing what they experienced. I'm allowing it. Day 6, the moment that changed everything. I presented the November 2010 memo, original document, Marchetti's handwriting, verified by 2 independent forensic examiners. I read it aloud, slowly, every word. Frank, we need these old tenants out, the rent-controlled ones. Don't fix things too fast. Let them suffer a little. The courtroom went silent. That kind of silence where you can hear hearts beating. I looked at Marchetti. For the first time, his expression cracked, just slightly, a tightness around his eyes. Judge Walsh held the document, read it herself, read it again, then looked up at Marchetti. Mr. Marchetti, did you write this? His lawyers immediately stood. Your Honor, we object to this line. Sit down, Mr. Sterling. Mr. Marchetti, I'm asking you directly. Did you write this memo? Marchetti looked at his lawyers. They were frantically whispering, shaking their heads, telling him not to answer. But Judge Walsh wasn't having it. Mr. Marchetti, I can hold you in contempt. Or you can answer the question, did you write this? Silence. 10 seconds. 20. 30. Then I don't recall writing that specific document. You don't recall? The forensic examiners are very certain it's your handwriting. I may have written something similar, but the context The context is very clear, Mr. Marchetti. Let them suffer a little. What context makes that statement acceptable? Marchetti had no answer. For the first time in his life, Gerald Marchetti had no answer. Judge Walsh put the memo down, looked at me. Miss Patel, do you have anything else? One more thing, Your Honor. I called my last witness, James Kowalski, Frank's nephew. I'd found him in Pennsylvania. He'd driven 8 hours to testify. Mr. Kowalski, when did you last see your uncle? 2 months before he died, September 2024. I visited him at the building. What did he tell you? He said he was tired, that his heart was acting up, that he should probably retire, but he couldn't. He said, James's voice broke. He said if he left, the building would fall apart and the people in it. He couldn't let that happen. Did he mention the notebooks? He did. He said he'd been keeping records for 30 years, that someday someone needed to know what Marchetti had done. He made me promise if anything happened to him to make sure someone found them. What else did he say? James pulled out a letter, handwritten, Frank's writing. He gave me this, said to read it if he died. I read it after the funeral. What does it say? James read it aloud, shaking. I've spent 30 years watching a rich man torture poor people. I couldn't stop him, but I documented everything, every repair he refused, every person he hurt, every dollar I spent trying to fix what he broke. I hope someone finds this. I hope someone cares. I hope someday there's justice for the people of 847 Prospect Avenue. The courtroom was crying, openly. Even some of Marchetti's lawyers looked uncomfortable. Judge Walsh called a recess. We'll reconvene tomorrow for closing arguments. Day 7, closing arguments. Sterling went first, tried to salvage the case. Your Honor, this is a tragedy. Mr. Kowalski was clearly a dedicated employee, but dedicated doesn't mean accurate. These notebooks are one man's interpretation. Judge Walsh cut him off. Mr. Sterling, I've seen 623 repair requests with corresponding denials. I've heard 15 tenants testify to identical experiences. I've read your client's own memo telling his employee to make tenants suffer. This isn't interpretation. This is documentation. Sterling tried to continue. Judge Walsh wasn't interested. Wrap it up, counselor. My closing was simple. Your Honor, Frank Kowalski spent 30 years protecting people his landlord was trying to destroy. He spent $67,000 of his own money. He documented 847 repair requests. He kept every receipt, every photo, every piece of evidence. Not for himself, for them. I gestured to the tenants in the gallery. These are the people Gerald Marchetti tried to erase. Frank made sure they couldn't be. That's what these notebooks are. 30 years of proof that they matter, that they existed, that what happened to them was wrong. We're not asking for revenge. We're asking for acknowledgement, for restoration, for a legal precedent that says landlords can't weaponize neglect. Frank is gone, but his testimony remains. Every word he wrote, every dollar he spent, every person he protected. That's his legacy. Honor it. I sat down. Judge Walsh was writing furiously, pages and pages. Then she stopped, looked up, looked at Marchetti. I've been a housing judge for 27 years. I've seen negligent landlords. I've seen incompetent landlords. I've seen landlords who cut corners and landlords who didn't care, but I have never, in 27 years, seen anything like this. She held up the November 2010 memo. This document alone is enough to find against you, Mr. Marchetti. But it's not alone. It's supported by 30 years of systematic abuse, documented by a man who had every reason to stay silent and every reason to speak. He chose to speak through his notebooks. I find for the plaintiffs, on all counts. The gallery erupted, cheering, crying, hugging. Judge Walsh wasn't done. Damages, $8.7 million, distributed among the 23 displaced tenants. Full building renovation at defendant's expense. Estimated $2.1 million, and she paused. Ownership of 847 Prospect Avenue is hereby transferred to a community land trust, permanently affordable housing. Mr. Marchetti, you no longer own this building. Marchetti stood up. Your Honor, this is... Sit down, Mr. Marchetti. I'm not finished. I'm referring this case to the district attorney. What you did may constitute criminal fraud, racketeering. We'll let the prosecutor decide. She slammed the gavel. This court is adjourned. Chaos. Beautiful chaos. Tenants rushing to hug me, press swarming, cameras everywhere. Mrs. Chen grabbed my hands. Frank would be so proud. I couldn't speak, just cried. 3 months later, New York State Legislature passed Frank's law. Deliberate habitability neglect is now a criminal offense. Landlords who systematically refuse repairs can face jail time. Superintendents or protected whistleblowers can't be fired for reporting neglect. 847 Prospect Avenue is now permanently affordable housing, new management, full renovation, every unit repaired. Frank's basement office is now a community room. His notebooks are displayed in frames on the wall. I visit Frank's grave every month, small cemetery in Queens. Simple headstone. I bring flowers, tell him about the building, about the law, about the people he saved. You did it, Frank. 30 years. You did it. Last week, a superintendent from the Bronx called me, said his landlord was doing the same thing, refusing repairs, neglecting tenants. I've been keeping notebooks, he said. Like Frank, I need help. I took the case, free of charge, because Frank showed me something. Invisible workers aren't powerless. They see everything. They document everything. And when they speak, even after death, the truth can't be ignored. My name is Maya Patel. I'm a tenant rights attorney. I live at 847 Prospect Avenue. Frank Kowalski was my superintendent. I never knew him well when he was alive, but his notebooks changed my life, changed hundreds of lives, changed the law. If you're a superintendent, a porter, a custodian, anyone who sees abuse, document it. Keep records, take photos, write it down. Your testimony matters. Even if you think no one's listening, even if you're alone, someday someone will find what you left behind, and it will matter. Subscribe to The Quiet Reckoning if this story changed how you see the invisible workers in your building. We tell stories about the people who protected us and the evidence they left behind. Frank Kowalski spent 30 years in a basement, writing, recording, protecting. He's gone, but 847 Prospect Avenue stands, renovated, affordable, alive, because one man refused to let it die, and his notebooks made sure the world knew why.